Hi everyone, this is my read-through of my The Shining presentation I did for my film internship in spring 2013. This is an abridged version of the presentation because the full thing runs about 15 minutes long. So here we go. One of the first things I discuss is the basics of The Shining. It is a film directed by Stanley Kubrick, starring Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall, and released in 1980. It is about a writer who loses his mind due to cabin fever and goes on a psychotic rampage to kill his family. At this point, I discuss the renaissance of the horror genre in the 1970s and 80s. At this time, the major themes and archetypes of horror were those of the slasher genre and making the films much grittier. I also mention how these films were very crude in both production and content, but they got the public's attention. The fact is, we're still discussing them nearly 30 years later just proves their impact. Before I go in depth about The Shining and 70s horror, I need to describe the context that set the stage. Kubrick's previous film to The Shining was Barry Lyndon. Barry Lyndon is a great film, but it didn't exactly match its cinematic worth and box office receipts. It was because of this, Kubrick felt he was being outpaced by other filmmakers and wanted a commercial hit. He specifically wanted to do something within the horror genre, but something so different it would blow all the other horror films out of the water, and that's exactly what he did. When comparing The Shining to that of 70s horror, you have to keep in mind the main staples of horror of that period. Usually involves teenagers, sex, and most notably, gore. Kubrick bucks this, and instead the main characters are a family of two middle-aged people with an adolescent-aged child. Kubrick wanted to make a horror film that was more than just creepy hallways with a scary visual palette. What he made was something very psychological, much more psychoanalytical than what was being done at the time. In order to personify this difference, I'm going to compare and contrast the famous Here's Johnny scene to that of a Jason Voorhees kill from one of the Friday the 13th films. Yawn. As exciting as an axe to the face is, it really doesn't terrify me in any way. It's just plain gruesome. Let's contrast this to the scene from The Shining. Here is the infamous moment from the movie of Here's Johnny, and see how it differs from that of just a generic kill from a slasher film.
Here's Johnny!
As you can see, you couldn't have a more stark contrast in two identical actions taking place. Our killers entering the room our heroes are in order to murder them. Take Jack chopping at the door with the axe. Every time Jack swings the axe, we can feel its weight. This is done by the way it plunges into the wood of the door and the way Jack has to work to pull it out. A very visceral action that you might not notice consciously, but your brain did. It is clear that The Shining scene is much more effective in entertaining filmmaking, which elevates Kubrick as a filmmaker and also elevates the horror genre as well. It is because of his use, music, pacing, and Nicholson Duvall's performances, Kubrick gives us a better product. In addition to highlighting the differences between 70s horror and The Shining, my focus is also to inform you more on the nuances of The Shining and less on the iconic. A major theme in all of Kubrick's films is nothing is simply arbitrary. Everything has a purpose. That's why when things are out of place in his films, it's truly unique and not just a continuity error on the filmmaker's part. There are numerous examples of this throughout The Shining, where things just don't add up. All these anomalies have been presented and flown under the banner of Room 237. Kubrick is able to bring you into this sinister world in a way without you even being consciously aware of it. The first example of this being the luggage the Torrance family brings up with them. It is shown multiple times in the beginning of the film that the Torrances drive a yellow Volkswagen. As most of you can see, there isn't a lot of room in that type of car for bringing a whole winter's worth of belongings to tide you over. Yet once they get to the Overlook Hotel, it looks as if they've packed 2 cars full of belongings and brought it with them. The next 2 examples are clear indicators that Kubrick was trying to deliberately disorient us through playing with the audience's visual ignorance. Look at these 2 pictures. Both scenes from The Shining in order to give us a visual representation of the hotel. The first being an establishing shot of the Overlook Hotel. Most of you know a major feature of the Overlook Hotel is its huge hedge maze. But when you look at the establishing shots of the hotel, the huge maze is nowhere to be seen. Continuity error? I think not. But let's take another look at another image. This video clip here is from earlier on in the film where Danny is sitting watching TV. Can you see what's wrong with this video on a fundamental level? Did you spot it? There's no electrical cord for the television. It's just playing somehow. Is this meant to signify some sort of supernatural presence in the Overlook Hotel? Maybe. But what I feel Kubrick is trying to show the audience through the art of film is how the Torrance family is disconnected from society, but continues to function in some surreal way, much like the hotel itself. But my favorite example of Kubrick playing our visual ignorance is this one. Pay close attention to the carpet and the path the rolling ball takes, and if you blink, you might just miss it.
Huh?
So did you catch what happened? When the ball rolls toward Danny, it follows a brown-colored line in the rug. After the camera goes behind Danny and then cuts to his front again as he rises from the ground, the brown column in the carpet the ball followed is now gone. But that's just one of the many inventive things Kubrick did with this scene. As we see, Kubrick was truly a master of the depth of field shot. When the camera goes behind Danny, and with the aforementioned depth of field, it makes Danny look tiny and insignificant when he is in the shot. This is an overall theme of The Shining, not just for Danny, but for all the characters that interact with the hotel. This leads us full circle to room 237. One main facet of Kubrick's directing was that every time Kubrick directed someone or something, it was a definitive action taking place. Take, for example, the clip of Danny in the hallway. It's not simply a little boy in a spooky hallway. It's the shot of a little boy in a scary hallway. Many filmmakers have filmed familiar sequences to how Stanley Kubrick did, but it's his rendition of these scenes that are the definitive take on the stated scene, action, or shot. Think of this while you watch the following clip and how many previous films have both before and after The Shining done the same thing. But it's this scene, directed by Stanley Kubrick, which is truly the definitive take of ultimate terror. For the sake of time, I'm skipping this clip. One final point about what I've covered about The Shining and Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick didn't want you to forget his films. He spent a lot of his life making them, and he always intended his films to be seen this way, with nothing being taken for granted. He wanted people to talk about his films, to discuss and argue about them, and ultimately take them home. Connect this to The Shining. Isn't the best horror the kind you can take home with you? That concludes my presentation on Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this, and have a great day. Bye-bye.